Comrades, my name is Keir Starmer, and I'm here to fuck the foundations. When I became your Prime Minister, not only did I get new hair and glasses provided by a donor who now has full access to 10 Downing Street and my bedroom.
The studio went silent as Katie Hopkins unleashed one bombshell after another, her words slicing straight through Keir Starmer's carefully polished mask. The man known for his calm, lawyer-like composure suddenly looked shattered, eyes glassy, voice trembling, completely blindsided. Viewers could hardly believe what they were watching, a politician unravelling live on air as Hopkins exposed secrets he never expected to face publicly. It wasn't just an interview anymore, it was a reckoning. And the question everyone's asking is, how did one fiery broadcaster manage to break Britain's most controlled leader in front of the whole world? The secret exposed.
Elderly people, I will crush you. I will take your bus passes, I will take your heat, and I will take the joy from your life, and you will die early.
The moment Katie Hopkins opened her mouth, you could almost feel the air in the studio change. She wasn't there to debate politely or trade rehearsed lines. She came armed with receipts, ready to torch Keir Starmer's entire image in one go. Her tone was sharp, unapologetic, and dripping with that trademark Hopkins fire that always leaves politicians squirming. And this time, her target wasn't just any politician. It was the man who's built his entire brand on being calm, rational, and unflappable. Within minutes, that calm cracked wide open. Hopkins accused Starmer of playing both sides of Britain's immigration crisis, and the look on his face said it all. Sheer disbelief that someone was actually calling him out without holding back. Hopkins went straight for the jugular. "You prioritised illegals, then you're suddenly the border cop," she sneered, and the audience gasped. It wasn't just an insult, it was an accusation that cut straight through years of carefully crafted political messaging. She reminded viewers that this was the same Keir Starmer who once pushed to decriminalise illegal immigration, defended housing migrants in taxpayer-funded hotels, and labelled anyone questioning it as far-right. But now, as election season looms, he's suddenly promising to take back control of Britain's borders. The hypocrisy, as Hopkins painted it, was staggering. "He's gone from hugging migrants to handcuffing them," she added, her words slicing like glass. You could see Starmer's jaw tighten as the camera zoomed in, the kind of shot that ends up looping on social media for weeks. The more Hopkins spoke, the deeper the cut went. She didn't just accuse Starmer of lying, she accused him of using ordinary Britons as props in his political theatre. "He put illegal immigrants in hotels while veterans slept on the streets," she said, her voice rising, "and then he had the nerve to call people racist for pointing it out." It was a brutal line, the kind that sticks in people's heads long after the broadcast ends. And the worst part? She wasn't wrong about the contradictions. For months, Starmer has tried to reinvent himself as the man who will secure Britain's borders, but Hopkins wasn't buying it. She laid out his flip-flops with the precision of a prosecutor and the venom of a tabloid headline, a combination that left him visibly rattled.
Until you're outside of it, and suddenly you feel it, and then it's overwhelming. Well, I've had a similar experience this last week being in America, specifically Florida.
Starmer tried to defend himself, mumbling about policy evolution and new priorities, but it only made things worse. Hopkins cut him off mid-sentence. "You mean a U-turn?" she snapped. The studio erupted in laughter, and that was it. The moment the mask slipped, Starmer's composure shattered under the weight of her relentless sarcasm. The audience wasn't just laughing at the line, they were laughing at him, at the man who'd spent years trying to appear untouchable, suddenly looking lost and cornered. What made it all so explosive was the contrast between Starmer's image and the truth Hopkins dragged into the light. For years he styled himself as the reasonable adult in British politics, the calm voice after the chaos. But Hopkins exposed something else, a politician so desperate to please everyone that he stands for nothing. She mocked his new border control plan as a political costume change, comparing him to a man trying on tough guy clothes 2 sizes too big. It was savage, it was funny, and it was absolutely devastating. By the time Hopkins was done, the conversation had turned into a public unmasking. Starmer's polished image of consistency and moral clarity was left in shambles, replaced by the image of a man caught pretending. The audience could feel it too. That uncomfortable realization that the leader they'd been told was steadfast was really just shifting with the wind. And as Starmer sat there, blinking under the bright studio lights, it was clear that Hopkins hadn't just embarrassed him. She'd exposed him. The calm, calculated leader of Labour had just been stripped down to what many always suspected, a politician with no backbone, caught crying under the glare of someone who finally dared to say what millions were thinking. The breakdown.
We were promised three things. Number one, we would be fully costed and fully funded. We're so fully funded and fully costed, we're essentially just like Katie Price or HS2 or the public sector in Argentina pre-Milei.
It started as a debate, but by the end it felt more like a public unravelling. Katie Hopkins didn't just throw jabs, she went for the knockout, and Keir Starmer didn't stand a chance. The moment she hit him with that line about prioritising illegal immigrants over our own good people, something inside him snapped. You could see it in his eyes, that mix of disbelief and panic, when a perfectly crafted political image starts falling apart on live television. For a man who built his entire career on calmness and control, it was brutal to watch that control slip away. His tone turned defensive, his words stumbled, and before long the man who was supposed to lead Britain looked like he was one comment away from walking off set. Hopkins kept going, unrelenting, her smirk widening with every hesitation Starmer made. "You've had more U-turns than a lost Uber driver," she said, and the studio audience erupted. Starmer tried to interrupt, to reclaim the moment, but she steamrolled right through him. "You criminalised British voices for questioning illegal migration, and now you want to pretend you're Churchill at the border? Give me a break, darling." That was the line that did it. The one that turned the debate into a spectacle. Starmer's face flushed red, his jaw clenched, and he snapped, "That's an outrageous distortion!" But his voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Hopkins didn't even have to respond. The silence said enough.
Are treated differently depending on our political affiliation, or I don't know what colour we are or what religion we are or whatever. Whatever reasons, the law is not the law.
From that point, the exchange stopped being political and became psychological. Starmer looked like a man unravelling in real time. His hands fidgeted, his tie loosened, and his polished smile turned into something closer to a grimace. He muttered something about complex systems and long-term strategies, but it came out like static, just noise to fill the air while Hopkins watched him crumble. She leaned back in her chair, that smug, satisfied expression only she can pull off, and said quietly, "You can't fake conviction, Keir. You either have it or you don't." That line hit harder than anything else she said. The room went quiet, and for a split second Starmer looked like he might actually break. Then came the moment that sealed it, the one that would be replayed on social media for days. Starmer's eyes welled up, not a full sob, but that unmistakable shimmer when someone's trying too hard not to cry. He blinked rapidly, took a shaky breath, and forced a smile that fooled no one. The audience gasped. Hopkins tilted her head and said, "Oh, come on, don't go soft on us now." The crowd laughed, and that laughter was the final blow. Starmer looked crushed, utterly exposed. By the time the segment ended, Starmer wasn't debating anymore. He was surviving. Every word out of his mouth felt desperate, every rebuttal weaker than the last. Hopkins had stripped away the lawyerly armour he hides behind and shown the public something raw, a man terrified of confrontation. When the cameras finally cut, Starmer looked like he'd just been through a car crash, dazed, exhausted, and completely defeated. Hopkins, on the other hand, walked out smiling, her phone already buzzing with notifications. Within hours, clips flooded social media. Starmer in tears. Hopkins annihilates Labour leader. Political meltdown of the year. The hashtags were everywhere. For once, the headlines weren't about policy or party. They were about emotion, humiliation, and the moment Britain's calmest politician cracked on live TV. Whether you liked Hopkins or not, one thing was undeniable. She did what no interviewer, opponent, or journalist had ever done. She made Keir Starmer cry. And in the ruthless world of politics, that's the kind of moment that doesn't fade easily. The aftermath.
We also promised to tread more lightly on people. We're doing this by arresting 11 and 12-year-old white boys in their own homes, even though the mothers are off partying in Ibiza. Typical. And if you're a wife of a Tory councillor.
By the next morning, Britain was buzzing. Every major outlet had the clip plastered across their front pages. Keir Starmer breaks down after Hopkins' brutal takedown. It wasn't just a headline, it was a national event. The video of Starmer blinking back tears racked up millions of views overnight, and social media was merciless. Memes, edits, parodies, it was everywhere. Some called it karma, others called it bullying, but no one could deny it was the most talked about political moment of the year. Katie Hopkins had done what no opposition party, no journalist and no public inquiry could. She shattered Starmer's perfectly rehearsed calm. Inside Labour HQ, the panic was instant. Advisers reportedly scrambled to put out statements spinning the meltdown as a moment of passion or evidence of humanity, but nobody was buying it. The British public has seen politicians cry before, but never like this. Not as a sign of sincerity, but as a sign of collapse. Staffers whispered about how the leader's team had begged him not to go on the show. One aide was quoted saying, "He wanted to show he could handle anyone. He didn't expect her." Meanwhile, Hopkins was trending worldwide, unapologetic and grinning from every headline.
However, Keir Starmer is none of those things, has none of those good intentions. He is merely trying to give the illusion of trying to control it.
The political fallout was swift. Critics said Starmer's tears weren't empathy, they were panic. Hopkins's monologue had dug up every contradiction in his career, from his U-turns on immigration to his failure to connect with working-class voters. By the time he walked off set, the damage was done. Reform Party supporters were cheering. Conservative pundits called it the moment Labour lost the moral high ground. Even neutral commentators admitted it was a disaster. The man who spent years branding himself as steady and serious now looked fragile, exposed, and defeated. Hopkins, of course, didn't miss a beat. She went on social media right after, posting, "Truth hurts, especially when you've spent your whole career avoiding it." Within hours, the clip was everywhere. Talk radio shows replayed her quotes, late-night comedians reenacted the tearful close-up, and morning TV hosts debated whether she'd gone too far. But the consensus was clear. She'd won. Hopkins' critics may call her cruel, but she's never been accused of being boring. She had single-handedly turned political discourse into theatre, and Starmer was her latest casualty.
Has been in Italy with Meloni. So you've got a left-wing, radical left-wing human rights guy over with what would be labelled as far-right Meloni in Italy.
For Starmer, the aftermath was brutal. Every public appearance after that interview was shadowed by whispers and smirks. The press began using words like rattled, exposed, and emotionally fragile. Poll numbers didn't just dip, they took a nosedive. Supporters tried to reframe his tears as authenticity. But the image of a man losing his composure under pressure stuck harder than any campaign speech could undo. Even rivals who had previously feared him started mocking his Hopkins moment. It became shorthand for weakness, the one thing a leader can never afford to show. Weeks later, when the noise finally began to fade, the clip still lingered like a stain on Tuz. His record, it wasn't just about what Hopkins said, it was what she revealed. Beneath the perfectly scripted talking points and the polished image, there was a man barely holding it together. And in politics, perception is everything. Hopkins had proven with one fiery segment that all it takes is 10 minutes of truth and venom to bring down years of image building. Whether you love her or hate her, she'd made history and left Keir Starmer to clean up the emotional wreckage in full view of the world. The fallout that wouldn't die.
Because as soon as you land someone or allow them into your country or they get into your country, it is almost, if not impossible, as you've seen here in the UK, to remove them.
Days passed, but the storm refused to settle. Every talk show, every political panel and every breakfast programme in Britain had one headline: the Hopkins hit. It wasn't just a bad interview. It had turned into a full-blown public reckoning. Clips of Starmer's teary moment looped endlessly across news channels, while social media turned it into a cultural circus. One meme showed him wiping his eyes with Labour manifestos. Another captioned his trembling face with "fully costed, fully broken." It was savage, relentless, and impossible to ignore. The man who prided himself on keeping his emotions buried had become the emotional headline of the week. Meanwhile, Katie Hopkins was everywhere and loving it. She went on talk radio the next morning, sounding half amused, half triumphant, claiming she had only done what the British press refused to do: hold Starmer accountable. "He's been lying to the public with a straight face," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I just handed him a mirror, and he didn't like what he saw." Whether you thought she was cruel or courageous didn't matter. Everyone was talking about her. Her clip had reached millions, making her both the most praised and most hated woman in Britain overnight.
Keir Starmer does not represent democracy. He works for his superiors, the bidders who tell him to do what to do.
Inside Labour, things were ugly. Leaks from party insiders told a grim story. Starmer's team was in crisis mode. Advisors were divided on whether to defend him or distance him from the disaster. One insider reportedly said, "He's always been robotic, but now people think he's brittle." That perception was poison. Even supporters started questioning whether he had the steel to lead or if he'd crumble under real pressure. Private donors were allegedly calling for reassurance. MPs were dodging interviews, and rivals within Labour began circling like sharks sensing blood. Hopkins had done what no political opponent could. She'd cracked the illusion of control that held Starmer's leadership together. The media narrative turned merciless. Columnists called him the crying captain of Labour, while one brutal headline from the Daily Mail read, "Hopkins does what Sunak couldn't, break Starmer in half." The clip even crossed into international media, with US and Australian outlets running headlines about Britain's tearful leader. It wasn't just embarrassing, it was defining. In politics, moments like that stick. Tony Blair had his grin, Boris Johnson had his chaos, and now Starmer had his tears. But the most shocking part was how the public responded. Polling data that week showed a dramatic dip in Starmer's personal favourability, especially among older voters who saw his reaction as weakness. Younger voters, meanwhile, were split. Some called it human, others called it hopeless. The internet, though, had already made up its mind. Starmer's name was trending not for his policies, but for being emotionally destroyed by Katie Hopkins. Every attempt to shift the conversation failed. Every new speech, every press release, every policy promise overshadowed by that one viral clip. Hopkins, on the other hand, had never looked stronger. She doubled down in interviews, refusing to apologise. "If truth makes you cry, maybe you shouldn't be in charge," she said bluntly on GB News, earning cheers from viewers and groans from critics. It was pure chaos, the kind of cultural moment Britain hadn't seen in years. Starmer's image, once so carefully built on competence and composure, now looked fragile, unsteady, and painfully human. Weeks later, the moment was still haunting him. Every time he tried to speak about immigration or border control, Hopkins's words echoed in the background. Every pause, every awkward smile reminded people of that meltdown. The internet never forgets, and neither do voters. Katie Hopkins had exposed more than a political secret. She'd exposed the one truth every politician fears, that when the mask slips, there's no putting it back on. And for Keir Starmer, that truth came with tears, humiliation, and a reminder that in the age of viral politics, one fiery woman with a microphone can burn down an empire. The legacy of a meltdown.
Formerly Biden, Kamala, Obama before that, all leaders in the EU, left-leaning leaders, Ireland and others.
By the time the dust settled, one thing was clear. This wasn't just another viral scandal. It was a political earthquake. Keir Starmer's breakdown on live TV had crossed from politics into pop culture. The memes hadn't stopped, the clips hadn't faded, and Katie Hopkins had officially cemented herself as the woman who made Britain's most polished politician fall apart in real time. What was meant to be a simple interview had turned into one of the most talked about moments in modern political history, and for all the wrong reasons. Behind the scenes, Labour was in silent panic mode. Sources close to the party said morale was at rock bottom. Internal polling leaked to the press showed a sharp drop in public confidence, not just in Starmer's leadership, but in his emotional strength. Some MPs even started whispering about replacing him before the next election, fearing he had become damaged goods. Others tried to spin the tears as humanity, calling him a leader who feels deeply. But the spin didn't land. For voters who had watched the clip, the damage was emotional, not intellectual. They'd seen a man lose his composure, and no amount of messaging could rewrite that image. Meanwhile, Katie Hopkins was reveling in her victory. She had done what every broadcaster dreams of, created a viral moment that would be replayed for years. Her unapologetic, no-filter style had once again split the country in two. Critics called her cruel, opportunistic, even dangerous. But her fans saw something else, a truth-teller unafraid to expose hypocrisy. And whether you loved or hated her, everyone agreed on one thing: she owned the story. For weeks, she dominated talk shows, podcasts, and front pages. Her brutal takedown had made her the face of fearless commentary, and the symbol of everything politicians like Starmer feared most: raw, unedited confrontation. Starmer, on the other hand, tried to quietly move on. He gave carefully worded interviews about staying focused on the issues and not engaging in personal attacks. But every time he opened his mouth, the press brought up that night. The phrase Hopkins moment entered the political vocabulary, shorthand for any public collapse under pressure. It followed him everywhere: in Parliament, in editorials, even in comedy sketches. For a man who had spent years crafting an image of stability, the irony was crushing. He'd become the punchline of the very caution he built his career on. In a way, the whole saga said more about the modern world than either of them. Politics has always been brutal, but in the era of viral outrage, it's become gladiatorial. One slip, one tear, one unguarded reaction, and your legacy can vanish overnight. Hopkins understood that better than anyone. She weaponized it. And Starmer, for all his polish and planning, never saw it coming. Months later, the clip was still being reshared. Every anniversary, every political misstep, every meme about weak leadership brought it back to life. Starmer's tears had become a political ghost haunting every speech he made. Hopkins' smirk, her tone, her lines, immortalized. And somewhere deep down, the lesson was clear for every politician watching. In an age where one viral moment can define your career, the real power doesn't belong to those who speak carefully. It belongs to those willing to say what everyone else is too afraid to. Katie Hopkins did exactly that. And Keir Starmer paid the price in full. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.